I've got the really good part of a partnership presentation, as I'll introduce, and then Lauren's going to do most of the conversation. This is really about a project that's been going on for about 7 or 8 years. So the issue is about the partnership bit, because Lauren started off as an MSc student undertaking an MSc in forensic psychology. That prompted a piece of research that we did at Lincoln Prison. At the time, she was working in Lincolnshire Action Trust, so as part of her job, we did some research at the prison on homelessness. That did her master's degree, which was great, and finished that, but that connected us in terms of thinking about what other kind of projects needed to happen and could happen, and we started at that time having a conversation about how you would evaluate a project that was in the pipeline at the time, which was called SPARC, and so this talk is about the SPARC presentation. We were going to have Alison Goddard here, who's the chairperson for Lincolnshire Action Trust, in terms of taking that talk about the Lincolnshire Action Trust bit, but Lauren's going to do that because, of course, she works for Lincolnshire Action Trust. But also, she's now a PhD student, just coming up to the end of her PhD, so she's submitting this summer sometime. And that's because LAT then saw, oh, this is really quite good. We need to have formally some evaluation of this. We need to have formally some way of looking at what we're doing with this project. And so they supported Lauren over the last 3 years to do her PhD. So it's a nice synergy between academic and partnership organizations, but blurring in between in a really nice way. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk about essentially all the work that they're doing in Lincolnshire.
Thanks, Todd. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I always admire people like Mark who can throw their voice to the back of a room, because I absolutely aren't. I'm not very good at doing it. So essentially the plan for today is to go through the who, what, where, when, how and why of this research, not necessarily in that order, but hopefully I'll answer all of those questions at some point. So just to give a bit of context as to Lincolnshire Action Trust, just a quick show of hands, who in the room has heard of Lincolnshire Action Trust before today? Quite a lot. That's really good, actually, and I think that says a lot about the partnership that we've got with the university that's developed, particularly more so in the last 5 or 6 years, through the working relationship that we've had with the School of Psychology, but also with schools like criminology and social care as well. So we're really proud of that partnership, so I'm pleased that there was such a show of hands. Just to kind of fill in the backstory, so we are a criminal justice charity. We were established in 2000, and we were originally set up to support people on probation around their employment needs. But obviously, as a third sector organisation, we've needed to respond to changes in need on a commercial basis, and I think we're very good at fitting the gaps that are left by public sector commission services. And so our services have changed a lot over the time, and we've grown considerably. So back in 2000, we were sort of 5 staff. We're now at 50 staff. And I should say as well that the name Lincolnshire Action Trust is actually a bit of a misnomer now, because we're not just based in Lincolnshire. We actually go up as far as Hull and Humber in terms of our prison work, and down as far as Stafford and Stockton. So we go quite wide in terms of what we do. So essentially we deliver services in the courts, prisons, probation and the community, and also in some schools as well. But most of our clients are involved in the criminal justice system in some way, whether that's because they're directly involved or because they've got family members who are in the criminal justice system. So as Todd said, we established our SPARC service, which I'll get into the details of what that is in just a minute, but it's our core service. It started in 2013 as a 6-month pilot project, but it's still running now, partly because of the partnership that we've had with the university. So we had initial success with the SPARC service. In the first kind of 6 months, everyone anecdotally was kind of saying, this is a really good service, how can we do more? So we needed that evaluation, and that's what prompted the funding of the PhD research. Okay, so just before I continue, I'd just like you just to take a minute to reflect on this. So put yourself in a room, okay? Imagine that you're locked in that room with no belongings, and people don't know where you are, so your family perhaps don't know where you are, you don't know how long you're going to be there for, and you don't really know what's happening. So just think about being in that room for a minute. And how would you feel, and what would you need? Does anybody want to volunteer their thoughts? Is it a pleasant feeling?
Very distressed.
Distressed, yeah, very distressed, yeah. So quite isolated, quite anxious, there's all sorts of feelings going on. So this is some of the feelings that our clients have told us, and they've said that what they would need is information. They need to know what's going on and they need some reassurance. Okay, so some of the words that our clients have used are unsure, alone, anxious, isolated. Don't get me wrong, there are some people who will feel relieved because what we're doing here, I know it's very pared down, but the reason I got you to do that exercise is because there are distinct parallels between that and somebody being locked in a police cell, a court cell or a prison cell. Okay? So yes, it's very basic in terms of the exercise that I've got you to do, but there's definite similarities there. So like I say, some clients will feel relieved because we see people who say, actually, do you know what, I'm ready to go to prison, because they've perhaps had very chaotic lifestyles outside of prison. But for most of the people that we work with, it's that distressed state, feeling anxious, feeling isolated, feeling scared, and that fear of the unknown if they've never found themselves in the criminal justice system before. So in response to that, we set up Supporting People After Remand or Conviction. So this was set up in partnership between Lincolnshire Action Trust and HMP Lincoln. And essentially what we do is we work in the court cells with people immediately after they've been sentenced or remanded to prison custody. So someone gets sentenced or remanded to prison by a magistrate or a judge upstairs, we're downstairs in the court cells waiting for that person. And we do an immediate keep safe interview. It's called a keep safe interview. And it's an assessment of their basic needs around things like healthcare, if they've got any learning needs, language needs, any caring responsibilities, and just any practical issues that they need to sort out. And what we'll do from that assessment is make a plan to start addressing those needs. And then on the following day, we will follow that person into the prison. So it's the same practitioner as has seen them in court. We'll follow them into the prison and see them in there as well. A lot of our clients tend to not believe us when we say, I'll see you tomorrow in the prison, which I think is a reflection of some of their previous experiences. Okay, so these are just some of the questions that we get. So, for example, we worked with a gentleman who, when I said to him what was his main concern, his solicitor had told him that he had a 95% chance of not going to prison. So he was appearing in Crown Court and he'd left his wife in a cafe up the road and said, I'll see you in a couple of hours. His wife had mental health issues and learning difficulties and wouldn't answer the phone to anybody but him. But because he'd been sent to prison, he couldn't use his phone, not until he got to the prison and got his reception phone call. So in that situation, we had to physically go out and find this lady and go and explain to her what had happened and provide her with reassurance and ongoing support. We have worked with a gentleman who, it's that what do I do about question. We really just never know what challenges we're going to come across when we're working with people in the court cells at that point of sentencing or remand into custody. So we had a gentleman who, he said, I've got a farm in Boston and it was rising floodwater and he was going to prison and his wife was in hospital. So that left us with a farm full of animals to try and rescue on a Saturday. So what we are as SPARC practitioners, we're not mental health specialists, we're not health specialists, we're problem solvers and communicators. And we work with other agencies to try and resolve those issues. Okay, so why do we do what we do? Hopefully I've already started to answer that question. But really, prisons provide us with an opportunity to change the life course for people who find themselves inside them. And that can be for the positive. But by and large, prisons are doing a varying job, I think we should say, on that. So in terms of England and Wales, we have the highest imprisonment rate of Western Europe. And you'll probably all have seen in the media about high levels of suicide, self-harm and violence, alongside staffing and resourcing challenges within prisons. The reoffending rate for prisons is not particularly good. If you look at people who are sentenced to short sentences, so 12 months or below, the reoffending rate for males coming out of prison with those short sentences is 64%. So really quite high. Back in 2009, Lord Bradley published his landmark report that said that there needed to be better support and assessment for people who are moving through the criminal justice system. Another big element of the support that we offer, families feel like they're punished too when someone goes into custody. So people feel like they're doing the time themselves. I went to a conference recently, and Nancy Luke, so I've cited there, She was talking about families who are drowning but not waving. So what she was talking about is that families find themselves really struggling because somebody's gone to prison, but they're not telling anybody, so they're not waving, they're not asking for help, so they're kind of hidden population really. So what's needed is innovation to address the increasing challenges of prison. And also there's just not very much known about the specific needs of people at the point of entry into prison. So we were looking at that as well. So the support that we offer is very simply based on the premise that if we support people to have their basic needs met at the point of transition into prison custody, then they're more likely to feel safe and secure, which means that they're more likely to engage in the services that are offered to them in the prison, they're more likely to engage in their sentence plans, and more likely to change their behaviour, and therefore have a better chance of successfully resettling into the community after release. Okay? So, very straightforward premise, and we do that by increasing the resources and reducing the challenges. So if you imagine it like scales, so we're tipping the balance, so the challenges are decreasing, I got the wrong way around there, the challenges are decreasing and the resources are increasing. And it's a series of behavioural nudges which are unique to each individual. So what I mean by that is that they're small things that are making a big difference to people. So for example, to support one person, we might make a phone call to their mum to let them know what's happened. For us, that takes us 2 minutes, but for that person and for that person's mum, it makes a big difference, but the combination of support is different depending on each person's individual situation. So in terms of the research that we did in relation to SPARC, we looked at what are the needs of people entering prison from court. There's lots of research about the needs of people in prison, but there's not much about that specific point of entry into custody, so that's what we were looking at. And then obviously we were looking at what was the impact of that SPARC support as well. So this is essentially getting into my PhD research now, so it's just a very quick whistle-stop tour because it's 4 years of work. So we did over 1,000 interviews over a 2-year period. So these were the Keep Safe interviews. So I should say that actually we're not just talking about over 1,000 people who've participated in research, we're talking about over 1,000 people who've been supported. So the research was kind of a secondary to actually receiving that support. So as you'd expect, high levels of need in terms of physical and mental health, so nearly half reporting or having diagnosed physical and mental health issues. 16% suicide and self-harm concerns at the point of entry into custody. So high numbers there. Language needs were overrepresented. 27% security concerns, so that was something that we felt would be a risk to the security of the prison, like drugs, mobile phones, threats to others, for example. And 54%, so over half, had some immediate concerns of some sort that we needed to do something with. In terms of the history of the people that we were seeing, so 1 in 5 weren't registered with a GP, and that was higher in some of the groups that we looked at individually, so higher for remand populations, so those that were going into prison unsentenced, for example. 46% had no mental health support in place. That's 46% of the people who disclosed mental health issues had no support. And 60% felt that their substance misuse was related to offending, but over 50% of them hadn't accessed substance misuse support. So you can see that it's not a particularly good picture for people at the point of entry into custody. So in terms of the activity, we did 328 physical health referrals, so that's to physical health within the prison, to alert them to the fact that that person is coming so they can make preparations. 491 substance misuse referrals, so that, again, that's to the substance misuse team inside the prison. And what that does is bring everything forward by a few hours. So for example, if somebody is on a methadone substitute script in the community and they tell us about it, we can then pass that to the substance misuse team in the prison, and that team can be getting on with getting that sorted so it's ready for when that person arrives. Because the alternative, where we don't offer this support, is that that person is sat in the court cells ruminating over what their problems are and nothing productive is being done about it. So actually it's making use of that few hours before that person gets to prison to try and put things in place to support them. We did 443 mental health referrals, 177 suicide and self-harm alerts, and that was really important for some people. So, for example, there was a gentleman who had a suicide and self-harm alert opened in the court cells because of the behaviour that he was displaying, which was really quite traumatic for everyone that was trying to help him. By the time he got to prison, he calmed down and he was like, no, I'm fine. But actually, because of the information that they'd received from SPARC, he was then put on what we call an ACT document to support him around suicide and self-harm. And actually it became very evident over the next few days that he did need that support. We contacted 175 families, so this is just from court, not from the day twos, there was more from day two. We secured 31 pets and completed 14 safeguarding referrals. So that could be to children's services, adult social care, or for police safe and well checks as well, depending on what the situation was. And then I touched upon it before, we looked at special populations as well. So we looked at specific groups such as people on remand, people with language needs, people with mental health issues, people with substance misuse issues, and different age groups, so the older prison population and young adult prisoners, and we found varying levels of need in those populations as well. Okay, so that first bit told us that there was a need for SPARC and that people have high needs at the point of entry into custody. But it didn't really tell us if we were making a difference in a positive way to people, or negative. So we utilised the prison's existing safer custody surveys, which should be done on an annual basis to look at things like suicide, self-harm and violence. This is a self-report survey completed by people in the prison. So we tagged along to that, and we asked some questions around SPARC, and then we put some health measures onto it as well. So I kind of thought when we did this that some people would find SPARC more helpful than others. So I thought that people who had been in prison before maybe wouldn't find SPARC as helpful, but actually across the board, nearly 90% of people said that they'd found it helpful in some way. So for some people that was sorting out the practical issues, for some people it was just having their concerns heard, and just having someone to offload onto and feeling reassured and getting that information that they needed. But most importantly, the SPARC clients scored significantly higher on a clinical outcomes routine evaluation, so a measure of wellbeing, than people that didn't receive the SPARC intervention. So what that meant in terms of the content of the wellbeing scale, it meant less feelings of panic, terror, despair, hopelessness, tension, anxiety and isolation. And more feelings of feeling happier and being able to do the things that they need to. So you can see how that would then have an impact on how somebody presents themselves during their sentence and how they engage in services. So that told us that we were having a positive impact, or gave us an indication we were having a positive impact, but it didn't really tell us why and how. It didn't really tell us what the function of SPARC was. So we did some focus groups, just a couple of small focus groups, and there was lots of themes that came out of it. The people that were in the group were really quite vocal about how SPARC had impacted on them and about what could improve as well. So they told us that it was reassuring, it was calming for them to see a SPARC practitioner, and what was really important for them is that it was support outside the system. So although our SPARC practitioners wear a purple polo shirt so that they're identifiable for safety more than anything, it's somebody who wasn't wearing a white shirt with epaulets. So somebody away from the system was really important. They felt they were better prepared for prison. So just that short intervention before they actually go to prison meant that they were better prepared. And interestingly, the reception orderlies, so prisoners who work in reception to support people on their arrival, they commented to the Deputy Governor that they could tell when somebody had been seen by a SPARC practitioner compared to when they hadn't, just because of the way people presented. So instead of coming off the van that takes them into the prison kind of quite uptight and distressed, they presented as more relaxed, and they could tell just by looking at people. So that was from the prisoners. They picked up on the support with practicalities, and interesting, the themes that came out of the focus groups in relation to practicalities directly maps onto the reducing reoffending pathways. So the reducing reoffending pathways covers things like housing, employment, relationships, health, substance misuse and finances. And they were the things that they said benefited from the SPARC support. They were the things that they were helped with. They talked a lot about help for families, so they talked about actually if you help my family then you help me, because if their families were struggling, then obviously that was another cause of concern and distress for them. They talked about as a quality service in terms of practitioners doing what they said they were going to. So they said they were going to see them the day after in the prison, they did. If they were going to go out and sort an issue out, they did. If they couldn't sort it out, they'd go back and say so. They were the types of things. And more than anything, they just valued the immediacy. So the fact that as soon as they got sent down by a magistrate or a judge, we were there to help them. They didn't have time to go and kind of ruminate over what had happened in their cells. They were starting to do something positive and productive. So they're kind of making the most of a bad situation. And then they value the continuity into the prison as well. It's not working. Try this one instead. I'm just stuck. Okay, so just in summary, so what we've concluded is that SPARC provides an effective way to assess and support people during their early days in custody. And it's done through that series of behavioural nudges that are unique to each individual person, and done through reducing the challenges and increasing the resources. And support during the early days in custody has positive implications for both their behaviour in custody, but also things like reduced suicide, self-harm, and the longer term impact in terms of resettlement as well. So in terms of the actual impact of our research, SPARC has been cited by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons as an example of good practice. The SPARC delivery has continued to date, which, as I say, it started as a 6-month pilot project back in 2013. So for us to be able to continue that has been a huge success. It was relaunched in 2018 as SPARC Plus, which was an enhanced model of delivery based on the feedback that we had from those focus groups. So I mentioned that they said that there were some improvements that could be made. So they said that rather than just supporting people through court, actually what about those people that transfer from prison to prison? And they said that they felt people would benefit from that. So now, as well as having a practitioner in the court cell, we also have a practitioner in reception as well, who sees those people who transfer from other prisons and those people who come into the prison from out of areas. So Lincoln Prison gets lots of people from places like Nottingham and Derby and Leicester courts as well. So those people are now getting that SPARC support. As I say, it's offered continuous service improvement as a result of the findings. So as well as relaunching as a different model, the feedback allowed us to engage a group of previous clients in designing some new literature for the service. So what they said was, actually, when we first come to prison, our first letter that we write to our families is just telling our families how to keep in touch. So why can't we design an information sheet for families about ways to keep in touch? So they designed that sheet for us, and that is now given to each SPARC client as they arrive, and they can send it out to their families, or we can send it out to their families depending on what their preference is. It's now on the commissioning framework for HMP Lincoln as well. And then outside of the kind of immediate impact of the SPARC service, there's been wider implications for LAT having a staff member with PhD level research experience. So for example, when the charity puts in bids now, if there's a requirement for kind of measuring impact, I will get cited as the person that kind of can go in and set that up. So as well as kind of being an operational manager as my day job, I then come in to help develop the monitoring and recording of impact for new services. So it becomes a business as usual, and we set up our services with kind of data by design rather than a kind of poor relative or an add-on later down the line. We do it as it's the normal thing to do. So what next? We want to produce a SPARC Toolkit. That's pretty much there, to be honest, because we've got a lot of the materials. And that includes like a training package for SPARC practitioners as well, which has been trialled with social work students. So we have social work students that come and work as SPARC practitioners, so from the university, coming and working as SPARC practitioners on the service, and we develop training with them. The findings will be used to inform a wider funding bid in partnership with health services. And just the findings have opened up so many avenues for further research as well. So just one example that I've given there, so we've developed this kind of transitional needs theory around the needs of people when they're transitioning through the criminal justice system and how we can support that. And actually I think that can apply to release from prison, transfer from prison to prison as well. So there's a whole range of more research that we can do on that. So I'll leave you with this. It's just a quick quote from one of our clients from the focus groups. So he said, while you're in the magistrates' court cells, it's awful, it's terrible. And then you see someone from the SPARC come along who wants to give you their time and their effort, and they want to know want to know what your problems are, and they want to help you properly, and it's brilliant. I couldn't believe it. It was like a ray of sunshine. I thought I was on my own again. That's it.